Hey, I'm Scott, and welcome to the channel if you're new here. This is just a quick look at a few features in the Tamron 70-180mm f2.8 E-Mount lens, which may be more important for video users. First up is autofocus. Checking speed and smoothness with face tracking, I thought it did very well. At 70mm, of course, it did better, keeping up with walking and running, snapping into focus as my son came into the frame pretty quickly and smoothly too. At 180mm, it did have a very slightly more difficult time keeping up with the speed of the moving subject, especially when running, but it never lost him and it never hunted. It always caught up very quickly and smoothly, and I think this is an impressive result for autofocus. As for the autofocus noise, I didn't even bother recording a sample because it's very quiet, basically silent. Even with the built-in microphone on the camera, I didn't notice anything. Tracking faces is usually one of the only situations that I'd rely on autofocus for video, so next I went on to the manual focus experience. The manual focus ring here is electronic, which I personally really hate. If there's a setting in the camera to switch the way this performs, I'm sorry, I'm not typically a Sony shooter, and the A7III that I have for testing has all Japanese menus. But with my current settings, it is speed dependent, which means that turning the ring slowly will shift focus less than moving it quickly. That makes it very hard to get predictable and repeatable focus pulls. But the ring itself is very smooth with a good amount of resistance, especially for an electronic focus ring, which means that if I did miss a way to change how this performs in the camera menu, the manual focus is pretty physically decent. I also had a lot of people asking how handheld video was with this lens, considering it doesn't have optical stabilization and it will rely on the camera's internal sensor stabilization. Again, testing this with the A7III at 70mm, it's alright. If you try to pan, it still gets that obviously handheld look, but holding relatively still with only very gentle movement, it could be absolutely acceptable. At 180mm, I honestly would never really handhold if I don't have to, regardless of the camera or the lens, but I think it could be usable if you need to, as long as you're not introducing any camera movement. Even then, it can be a little jumpy, and depending on your subject, it's sometimes more noticeable than others, but I would say it's borderline usable. Once you start trying to pan or do any major movement though, it gets fairly ugly as I'd expect. It was windy and I was cold and a little shaky, so these results are probably on the low end of what you could get with good technique. Finally, just a light look at the focus breathing. When going from one extreme to the other at either 70 or 180mm, there is some focus breathing. You can see it here with the pole on the side, for example, and in these shots at 70mm, the right side and the river on the bottom also come in and out of the frame. But within a reasonable focus throw, even this one, which is fairly extreme, it didn't stand out quite as much. I only tested it in a couple different settings, but as a largely photo lens user myself, there was nothing shocking here, and I've definitely seen worse. So overall, the autofocus for video is impressive. Handheld shots can be pulled off, especially if there's not any camera movement involved, and focus breathing is not a huge issue. If you haven't seen my overall review of this lens yet, please do go ahead and click the link on screen or down below. And I have this lens for just a little bit longer, so if there's any other specific questions you want to ask about this lens or its performance, please do so in the comments and I will do my best to get to it before sending the lens back. Again, thank you to Tamron Japan for making this review possible, and as always, thank you guys for watching.